Hello and welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, doing a solo episode today, recapping week one. We're going to go over some split backfields. We're going to go over the waiver wire. We're going to go over some trade targets. Very excited to be back on the mic. Very excited that football is back. So this is going to start our in-season content as we roll forward throughout the season. So the first topic, as you can see on the screen here that I want to talk about is the split backfields, right? There was a lot of wait and see on some of these backfields that had some question marks, right? Between running back 1 versus 2, or if there was going to be a passing downs back that could get more targets or more work than we were thinking. So kicking it off is definitely Seattle, right? We were expecting Kenneth Walker to be the number 1 and that Charbonnet would kind of have a backseat role to him. And that was not the case at all. So I am very, very worried about Kenneth Walker as of right now. So you can see up here on the screen, right? We got 12 carries for Charbonnet for 50 yards and a touchdown. Kenneth Walker only 10 for 20 yards. Really didn't get it going early, and Charbonnet did get it going early. So, maybe that had a little bit to do with what ended up happening here, but I'm not sure that Ken Walker is really going to be getting the bell cow role that we were expecting. Charbonnet played at the goal line. Charbonnet played on third downs. So Ken Walker, he did get more targets. You can see here he had 3 targets to Charbonnet's 0. And he got all of those on third down, but only 4 yards there too. So not like Walker had this huge role that we were maybe expecting here. You can see too, Charbonnet played 30 snaps to Ken Walker's 21. So he actually was out there for a higher percentage of the snaps. And this is definitely something worth monitoring. Definitely a red flag for Ken Walker owners. If you don't have Charbonnet and you drafted Ken Walker, you definitely want to keep an eye on this. And if anybody is going to be buying Ken Walker at face value, like trying to buy low on him, I would be looking to see what I could get. If I could get anything that would resemble a starter for him, especially at the running back position, because it still feels super thin, in that 15 to 25 range, that's something that I would be exploring this week. I would definitely prefer guys like Alvin Kamara. David Montgomery didn't have a good game, so maybe not him, but anybody in that area. James Conner, who we'll get to here next, I would definitely rather have James Conner moving forward. So I'm definitely very worried about Ken Walker. Very interesting setup there. So transitioning into Arizona then, right, we have Trey Benson, who played quite a bit more than we were expecting. He still played well behind James Conner. James Conner had 43 snaps to Trey Benson's 22. And Conner definitely had more carries and work, right? He still got the targets, 4 to Benson's 1 and 12 carries to Benson's 8. But Benson had the 52-yard run, right? So he had an explosive play. You see the 8 for 69, 8.5 per carry. There was some questions coming into this year whether or not Benson was going to be super involved. And I think it's safe to say now at this point that he is going to be significantly more involved than he was last year, right? So we had talked about James Conner being a top 12 option while he's on the field. And that's kind of always been true throughout his career. But I'm not sure that level of upside exists if Benson's going to be out there as much as he was on Sunday. So I don't know that Benson is somebody that you need to add yet. If you're a James Conner owner and still worried about his potential injury history, then go ahead and add Benson. But overall, I think he's just going to be more of a nuisance to James Conner's value than we were otherwise expecting. Moving down now to the Jacksonville backfield, this was a huge story because Travis Etienne got all of the work. I mean, he was out there on 40 snaps. He was out there over 70% of the snaps. And this game got out of hand and he wasn't really out there at the end of the game. Some of these numbers too were racked up from Bigsby and Tootin at the end of the game. And so, it just looked like it was going to be all Etienne. So he had 143 rushing yards on 16 attempts. That was aided significantly by that 71-yard run. If he had a little bit more juice in the tank, maybe he scores there. It was super encouraging to see the role. Liam Cohen obviously thinks of him as the lead back. All of the preseason smoke screens of Bigsby in the lead rushing role, or, Bigsby getting to start one of the preseason games even. I just feel like that was just kind of... I just feel like we can kind of dismiss that at this point. It's going to be Etienne. This is going to end up being one of the best values at running back in the draft, I think. And a guy that I whiffed on, I thought I was buying into Bigsby. Bigsby was the better runner last year. And so I kind of expected Bigsby to be in that 12-ish touch range. And he got 5 and they were not until late in the game. So all aboard Etienne as long as he's going to be in this role, because 16 carries and 3 targets is bell cow usage. So that's definitely the running back you want there. And another guy that I would consider taking in a Ken Walker deal if somebody does not want to make that move right now, right? If somebody is willing to give you more than Etienne for Walker, that's something that I'd be looking to do. If you can get a bench receiver plus Etienne and trade Walker, another guy that I'd be willing to do that on, even after 1 week. And I know that feels like an exaggeration, but it just seems like Walker's going to be trending towards a split with somebody was extremely good when he wasn't on the field, and Etienne, just got this huge workload that that you're looking for, obviously, to kick off the season. Moving over to Pittsburgh, we got some good information here from Pittsburgh. Right? Jaylen Warren still led the backfield. He had 11 carries. He operated on the goal line. He got the receiving touchdown. Kenneth Gainwell was significantly involved. He actually outsnapped Jaylen Warren. He had 7 carries and he had 3 targets as well. He operated as pretty much the entire third down back, which I was a little surprised by. Jaylen Warren had been in that role before, but it almost looked like Jaylen Warren was playing Najee's role and Kenneth Gainwell was playing Warren's former role. So maybe the whole competition for this backfield was really between Jaylen Warren and Caleb Johnson for the early downs role, and Gainwell was always going to play that passing game role. I mean, I don't know that for sure, but that's what it ends up feeling like here. Caleb Johnson barely played 2 snaps, lost a fumble. He's a complete afterthought. We'll talk about him more in a second, because I feel so bad for anybody that Caleb Johnson in the middle rounds, because I borderline think he's a cut now for a redraft. In Dynasty, obviously have a lot of hopes for him long term, but if this is going to be anything close to his usage over the first half of the year, he is not going to be somebody that you want to even be taking a chance on. You've got to try and get somebody on your bench that has higher upside than Caleb Johnson. Moving down to New York now, we obviously were worried about Breece Hall and the potential impact of Braelon Allen, but you can see here, Breece Hall was awesome. Carries 107 yards. He didn't score, but also did see 2 targets as well, which isn't going to be a huge role with Justin Fields out there, but it was encouraging to see that he did get a couple targets and he had a couple great runs. He racked up that 5.5 with a long of 18, but he had 3 or 4 runs over 10 yards. So overall, great start for Breece Hall. Braelon Allen still was out there on 20 snaps, so he played about a third of the time, and he did get goal line work. Braelon Allen was the one who scored the rushing touchdown. 6 carries, 9 yards. I mean, I'm not sure that that's really something we're going to be going after if Breece Hall is going to continue to get this level of work. I mean, he had 37 snaps, just basically out there all the time. And so I'm going to end up being a little bit wrong on Breece Hall again if this is the usage. Now, could Braelon Allen grow into a bigger role? That could definitely happen. But until we see it, Breece Hall is definitely the guy you want. So I've been hearing move Breece Hall up. I've been hearing Breece Hall over Alvin Kamara even, which I didn't have that particularly close in the preseason. So, some people have been Breece Hall truthers, and we'll see how it looks when it's not against the Steelers, when it's not 32 points in a game. They kind of went off as an offense. Justin Fields looked great as a passer. That's not always going to be the case. So, maybe tap the brakes a little bit on Breece Hall, but the usage is just so great to see. If you drafted him, you can feel much easier than you probably did before week 1. And the last backfield I want to get into here is Cleveland. So we got a huge surprise with Dylan Sampson. He had 8 targets and caught all of them for over 60 yards. I mean, he was dominant in the passing game. And that was a surprise to me, even because Jerome Ford played on all third downs. So Sampson got 7 of his 8 targets on first and second down, only 1 target on third down because he didn't play a lot on third down. But Jerome Ford outsnapped him, but it was just so much on third down that, he didn't get a ton of opportunity. Only 6 carries, 8 yards, didn't look good. Sampson didn't look great on the ground either, 12 for 29, but he is basically going to be the workhorse, it looks like, in the passing game and on early downs until Quinshon Judkins is back. Now, if Judkins comes back this week, that's going to throw an element into Sampson's game that's going to be interesting, because I kind of don't think that Ford's role is going to change. I think Sampson's role is going to be the one that changes. Judkins is going to come in and be the early down player, and if Ford is going to continue to play on passing downs, it might just be that Judkins ends up being a major value and a great player over the second half of the season, especially as they kind of feather him in early because he missed all of camp. So we'll see. Dylan Sampson's going to be on a lot of waiver wire columns, and he's going to be a favorite. And I'm going to mention him in waiver wire here too. But I would temper expectations a little bit. Don't spend a ton of your fab on Dylan Sampson, even if he's out there. But Jerome Ford, I think, his better days are ahead for him, even though he's going to hit wires all over the place, because he did play such a significant role here with 41 snaps. Just didn't translate into a lot of touches. One other backfield I did not end up putting on here was Washington, and I didn't put it on here because it played out almost exactly as we expected. It was Bill Krosky-Merritt had 10 carries, and he turned that into 80 and a touchdown, and Eckler had 6 carries for 30 yards, and he had a bunch of catches, 3 for 30 or 4 for 35, something like that. So, that backfield just proceed as you would expect. Bill Krosky-Merritt's the early down guy, Brian Robinson role, and then Eckler is still just the pass catcher and is going to be changing pace and all the third down work, all that type of stuff. So those guys proceed as you expected during your drafts. So now some trade advice for this week. So preseason calls that I feel good about after watching week one. So these are guys that we either said do not draft. And so I'm going to suggest you don't trade for these guys. Don't even buy low on these guys. And then guys that we are higher on than consensus that we feel very good about here going into the rest of the season. So the first guys on the do not trade for us, hopefully if you've been listening to us that you don't have any of these guys on your teams. The only one that you might have is Caleb Johnson, just because Matt likes Caleb Johnson a lot more than I did. But Bo Nix, right? We had just been suggesting do not draft Nix. We had him at quarterback 14 in our consensus. And so, if you've been listening to us, there's no way you got him because he was going in the top 10 pretty easily. He looked terrible. They did not throw for him any yards. And Cortland Sutton actually had a good game. He had 6 for 60 and a touchdown. And Nix still just was not good. So I know they ended up winning the game, but that was just mainly because they just got through it. I guess, they won a close game with leaning on their defense against a rookie quarterback, and honestly, Cam Ward played pretty well. It was just the supporting cast around him that didn't play well. They were able to sneak out a win against a team that we don't expect to be very good this year. So I'm super worried about Bo Nix. If you have him, especially in Superflex, I'd be looking to trade him if somebody wants to give you anything in that mid 12 to 15 quarterback range. Like if you get Dak Prescott for him, I would definitely be doing that, even though Dak didn't play very well. He played well. Just if CeeDee Lamb would have caught the ball, Dak's line would have looked a lot better. But Bo Nix, super worried here. I feel like he's going to be this year's CJ Stroud a little bit, right? He was quarterback 7 in average draft position, and I just don't know if he's even going to be more than a back-end QB2. Next guy up is Isaiah Pacheco. This was my biggest call in the preseason, beating the drum of do not draft Isaiah Pacheco. He is absolutely not worth it. There's going to be Kareem Hunt mixed in, and once Brashard Smith gets going as the season goes along in the passing game role, it's just going to be downhill for him. He comes out, only gets 7 touches, just does hardly anything with that too, right? 4 PPR fantasy points. So I'm just not in on Isaiah Pacheco here, and still continue to be out on Isaiah Pacheco. So just make sure if somebody is looking to deal him because they're worried, I'd be very worried too. This is not somebody I'd be making a deal for at all. And I kind of think he's going to get supplanted as the lead back. Next guy up is Caleb Johnson. I mentioned this in the breakdown of backfields. He only got 2 snaps, 1 carry, and lost a fumble. He's not going to be out there. So it's just, he's a cut. And I know we normally are all in on rookies, waiting, being patient, second half of the season type of outlook here. He's not even somebody that you can throw in your lineup at all right now. He doesn't have a role. I would rather have Kenneth Gainwell on my team. So, it's just so unfortunate because it was probably a 9th, 10th round pick maybe that you were spending on Caleb Johnson in your Superflex leagues. And so cutting somebody like that is tough, but I just can't imagine you have a worse player on your team unless you really missed on a couple of your late picks. But yeah, unfortunately here, you definitely don't want to be making a move for Caleb Johnson. And if you have him, you have to think seriously about cutting him. Next guy is Devontae Smith. So again, I was way lower than Matt on Devontae Smith. I had him at wide receiver 30 in my last rankings update. And it was mainly the offense, it's just, obviously he's an excellent player. It's just when Goddard and AJ Brown are out there, he just generally doesn't do that well, on top of the fact that they cut their passing volume so much. And then they come out in week 1 and they don't have any problem beating Dallas, and they barely threw it. It's just less than 20 attempts again. But he had 3 for 16, and it's just not somebody I'm going to be looking to even try and buy low on. This is not somebody I'm targeting in trades. And if anybody will take him from me, again, somebody that I'm looking to try and get off of. And maybe it's too late to make a swap for Tetsuroa McMillan, for example, somebody like that. Bryce Young didn't look great, but maybe you can turn Smith into Tet McMillan. Maybe you have a lower player on your bench too that could be interesting to them, 2 for 1, and trying to get somebody like that. But again, Devontae, unless there's an injury or unless the offense changes significantly, which I don't think is going to happen, I'm out on Devontae Smith. Don't be trying to acquire him. And then the last guy, George Pickens. This again was another guy that I was just way below consensus on. I didn't have him ranked, or I had him ranked really close to wide receiver 40 among receivers. And obviously it's only 1 week, but the way it played out was just so close to what I was expecting, where it was CeeDee Lamb for a ton of targets. CeeDee Lamb had 13 targets, but then also Jake Jake Ferguson out-targeted Pickens, which was something that we considered, even though Pickens is a better talent than Ferguson. The role itself of closer to the line of scrimmage, on the seam, over the middle, is not something Pickens does. So it was just one of those things where Pickens isn't going to be getting huge target shares, and that makes it really hard to rely on Pickens from week to week. So he'll have those boom weeks, but this one was just highlighting, again, 4 targets, 3 catches, 30 yards, where that's going to happen a lot with a player like this, and that's why I didn't want him. So he's maybe somebody that I would be the most interested on this list of 5, but again, not somebody that I'm actively targeting in a trade at all. So going on to the buys now. So we got some players that we're pretty excited about, or I was pretty excited about coming into the season. We got Justin Herbert. We had him up at QB 11, quite a bit above consensus. He was QB 12 last year when they were establishing the run, and they had all kinds of differences in personnel. They didn't have a necessarily locked in wide receiver 1 like they do coming into this year now with Ladd. And then week 1, he just explodes, 27 points, and Quinton Johnston looked great. And Keenan Allen looked back to not all the way to himself, but in his role where he looked comfortable, right? In the slot, 7 catches, 68 yards and a touchdown. And we got Keenan on this list a little bit later too. I had joked that Keenan is somebody that I just wanted to push up to wide receiver 20 because with Herbert, we already know the role is so valuable and he's been so great in it in the past. Herbert and Keenan, I guess I'll just lump in because, they're kind of tied pretty closely together. But overall, I just think the Chargers offense looked great. They had 70% pass calls too. I mean, they had 34 attempts, had 7 scrambles by Herbert, and then they had 3 sacks. So it was just like 41 of their 68 plays or 66 plays, whatever it was, were called pass, which is not normal for Greg Roman. And, people are like, oh, this is going to be a run first offense, which it's not going to be 70% pass very often. I mean, they were playing the Chiefs, but if it's 55 or 60, that's going to be a lot of work for the passing game. Very excited about both of these players if you got them at good values, especially in your Superflex leagues. Next guy up is Kyren Williams. So there were a lot of people knocking Kyren down the board. It just feels like that's the popular thing to do in the offseason just because he's not super exciting. He's not super explosive. But the thing with Williams is he just gets all of the work. And, there was some Jarquez Hunter rumors. Is he going to get some work? And then it's just like, okay, he didn't even play. So it was only Corum, only took a few snaps away from Kyren. And other than that, he was out there the whole time. They didn't have a very good offensive output this week, but it will be better moving forward. Puka looked great. Adams looked great. Stafford didn't get a lot of practice time, and Kyren did score a touchdown in this one even too. Not worried here. Somebody that if you were targeting earlier in your drafts inside the top 10 running backs, you got to be feeling good today. Definitely somebody I would be trying to acquire if somebody is still worried about the role. Next guy up is Keon Coleman. So I had said a lot in the offseason that I was worried that Keon Coleman was just the number 1 player that the industry was just going to be wrong on, right? That we would look back later in the year and say, man, this was just, the writing was on the wall here for Keon to be a breakout in a major way, like a possible league winner. And not saying that that's going to completely come to fruition, but after week 1 and after seeing how much Josh Allen relied on him, 11 targets, 8 catches, 112 yards and a touchdown, it was pretty encouraging to see, really. And he wasn't open all of the time, but he was open a lot. And a lot of those were easy throws, boundary, in breaking. They looked for him on the 2-point conversions, on the touchdown. It was kind of bat at the line, but overall, really think that Keon Coleman is going to be a starter moving forward. I would expect him to be in a lot of people's lineups, and it was him that was kind of the alpha down the field on this team. So I'm very much excited about Keon Coleman. If you have him anywhere, hold tight. If you think somebody is still valuing him as like the 10th or 11th round pick that they probably used to get him, go out and try and acquire him for anything that you can, basically, right? Like if you have a Devontae Smith and you can turn that into Keon Coleman plus something, like I would 100% be doing that at this point. And then the last guy on this list is Tyler Warren. We were hopeful that he was going to get volume, and that's exactly what happened. 9 targets, 7 catches, 76 yards, and he was awesome. They just came out, first drive of the game, they threw it to him 3 times. It was a 14-yarder, an 8-yarder, and a 21-yarder, just bang, 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 3 of the first 5 plays. And it was like, oh, okay, here we go. This is definitely different than anything that we could have possibly hoped for. And so, not to compare him to Bowers, but it feels like he has the makings and the possibility of becoming this year's version of the rookie tight end end that hits, right? Maybe it's not to the extent that Bowers did last year, but we had Laporta 2 years ago who was tight end 1. We had Bowers last year who was tight end 1, and I think now we're going to have Warren who possibly steps into that rookie role of competing to be a top tight end, and maybe that's top 5 instead of top 1. But overall, great game. We got to see his red zone game increase. He did get a rush as well, so that was interesting to see that they used him creatively. But if you had Tyler Warren on your team, you got to be feeling very good about your tight end position. All right, and let's jump into the waiver wire now. So we got a bunch of names here. I'm going to try and go through this relatively quickly, talk about fab in terms of what you're trying to do. But starting with the quarterbacks, you've got Jackson Dart. So Russell Wilson looked horrible. I mean, he didn't even complete 50% of his passes. He was at 4.5 yards per attempt. They can't keep rolling him out there if he's going to look anything like that. Malik Neighbors was understandably incredibly frustrated. I mean, the offense was just horrible, and it was the Commanders' defense, which is solid, but not that. They only score 6 points. Like, Dart is going to be out there sooner than later. These guys are coaching for their jobs here, and they just went and took Dart in the first round. They traded up to get him, and I just can't imagine he's going to be on the waiver wire much longer. The reason I have him listed here first is in your Superflex leagues, if he is available, you need to add him this week. You got to get in front of the waiver wire on him specifically. Even if it doesn't switch this week, I think it's going to happen sooner than later. The Giants' schedule is absolutely brutal, and they go up against Dallas this week, which I think, it is a division game, but I think that's one of the easier defenses or easier teams that they play over the next 8 weeks. So, get him into a situation where he can have a solid first game, divisional game, maybe they make it closer. And then, he's going to get like the Chargers and the Chiefs. So many difficult defenses here over the next couple weeks. If they do stand pat with Wilson and make him go through the whole first part of the schedule, and then Dart gets, from week 9, week 10 on, I would be pretty surprised at this point. I just don't think that they could continue to roll Russ out there. And then Winston is somebody that they theoretically could go to, but Dart already is QB2 on the roster. He already beat Winston out. They're going to Dart as soon as they move off of Wilson. If you can afford the roster spot, I would definitely use it sooner than later. Next guy up is Aaron Rodgers. I mean, he looked like vintage Aaron Rodgers. That was crazy. 244 yards, 4 touchdowns, no turnovers, put up 34 points on the Jets, a defense that a lot of people thought were going to be very good. So, overall, hard to argue with it. DK Metcalf had 4 for 80, didn't even score any of the touchdowns. It was Calvin Austin. It was Jaylen Warren. It was Jonnu Smith. If he's got these weapons at his disposal that he's going to end up using effectively, and DK is obviously going to be the alpha, I think that Rodgers could end up being a solid back-end QB2. Somebody that, as hard as it is to say, might end up in the same area as Bo Nix in terms of fantasy production. If he's available on your wire, and he's 19% available, which in Superflex leagues, that's obviously not the case, but if he's out there, I just want to highlight that this is somebody that you need to go at for sure this week, coming off a great performance. And then the last guy in quarterback is Spencer Rattler. I only included him because he threw the ball 46 times. That was wild. I was not expecting Kellen Moore to come out and just have Spencer Rattler sling it around the field, but that's what happened. It ended up being good for Juwan Johnson, who you see over here in the tight ends. It was great for Chris Olave, 13 targets. Even Shaheed had like 7 targets. So overall, I think Rattler is worth a shot if he's going to be getting that kind of volume. He didn't play great this week or anything, but he had over 200 passing yards and he had like 25 rushing yards. And with that kind of volume, like I said, you can kind of back into production against good matchups. So if you have a spot for him, consider him if you really need a quarterback. Moving over to running back is Dylan Sampson. So we talked about him at the top of the show, but I do think that he is still worth adding. I wouldn't go wild on Fab. He's only 52% rostered. So if he's available, add him. I would not be looking to start him, especially if Quinshon Judkins is going to be active. I think it's interesting to see what's going to be the dynamic between him and Judkins, especially early in the year. And if it is still going to be him playing a lot of the downs and Jerome Ford, if there is a transition of him taking over passing down work from Jerome Ford, at all, once Judkins is back, I think then he actually will be worth hanging on to. 5% maybe. I'd probably put a $2 bid if I could on somebody like Sampson, because, again, with the bigger bids is somebody that you want to be able to keep long-term or for the whole season, or somebody that's going to have and maintain trade value. Throwing a small bid at Sampson, I think, is worth it. Next 2 guys here are kind of more handcuffs or passing down role. So DJ Giddens, we got to see him get 12 carries because that Colts game with the Dolphins got out of hand very quickly. So, Jonathan Taylor was great with 18 carries and 3 catches, but then, he's not going to be out there towards the end of the game, and Giddens got a lot of work. So it was pretty clear that he was the handcuff to Jonathan Taylor. So if you're a Jonathan Taylor owner, you got a roster spot, go ahead and pick up DJ Giddens. I thought he looked fine and could be a back end running back too if anything were to happen to Taylor. And then the last guy, Kenneth Gainwell, we talked about him also with the split backfields, how he kind of had taken over the passing downs role. And so he had 3 targets and 7 carries. And so, led the team in snaps. So that doesn't always translate when you're third down back into fantasy production. But if you're strapped at running back or you just want to take a shot on somebody that could back their way into a bunch of receiving game production when you need a desperation flex, I think you could do worse than Gainwell. Moving over to the wide receivers now is Hollywood Brown. So this is obviously the number 1 waiver claim of the week, with Xavier Worthy going down and Rice suspended. Hollywood over the next 5 weeks, I would anticipate is going to be ranked as a top 20 wide receiver. So he, especially in your 3 wide receiver leagues, is going to be very valuable and very important over the first month-ish of the season. So he got 16 targets, turned it into 10 catches for 99 yards. And right, with that sort of workload, you just fail with Mahomes. He only had like 8 for 40 before he caught that long pass right at the end of the game to set up their field goal to try and make a little bit of a comeback there. Overall, like I said, the volume was just too much. He's going to get in the end zone, and he's always been a good target earner throughout his career. So the fact that he's going to be the number 1 kind of only game in town, I think it's definitely worth picking him up. If you need help in your starting lineup, I would spend maybe a little bit more, but I still, again, not somebody that I anticipate long-term is going to have a ton of value because Rashee Rice will be back in week 7, and I expect Xavier Worthy to be back at some point down the stretch during the year. So overall, I'm probably just going about 10% on Hollywood max. And I would be trying to maybe push the limit on the lower limit if I don't need a starter immediately and try and go in that 3, 4, 5, 6% range for Brown. Tillman, another guy that we put and beat the waiver wire that had a great game, 5 for 50 and a touchdown. This was kind of why we were down on Judy going into the year. Judy is still 5 for 66, so he was fine, but Tillman very involved. And, it was kind of Harold Fannin, who you'll see next to, and Tillman that kind of took the value away from Njoku and Judy. Surprising to see there, but Tillman, very talented player, somebody that you should be looking to get onto your teams if you can, back end bench guy. Kayshon Boutte, another surprise here, right? He was somebody that I felt like was going to be wide receiver 4, somebody that I thought might struggle to get on the field in general. And then he led the receiving core in snaps. So, it's just something that was kind of crazy. Stephon Diggs only played a limited role, which coming off the ACL, we probably should have expected, but Diggs did get targeted heavily when he was out there. So I do think once Diggs is up to full speed, he will be the number 1, but Boutte was great. I think he's going to play in front of Kyle Williams now, at least, so he'll be on the field. Drake May really likes him. Tomorrow Douglas didn't do a ton. He had a touchdown, but had negative receiving yards. And Boutte was kind of the guy down the field and, 90 plus yards. So I definitely feel like Boutte is somebody that should be owned, even though he's only 4% owned. For your deep league listeners, this guy is definitely going to be available in your leagues. Last guy up here is Quinshon Judkins. So I intentionally put him last, even though he had the best game of the group and he was awesome in Brazil. But I just, there's a long history here with him not being excellent. So if you want to put a couple dollars down on him, or you think he's the best available because, the quarterback looks good, or you just think that maybe he ascends into the downfield target and Herbert's got a cannon, okay. But I definitely think he's still going to be the third target. And I think it's going to be a lot of volatility and it's not going to be ever comfortable starting him. We've seen him have some of these breakout games and I just don't know that we can count on him moving forward. So a couple dollars max on him, in my opinion. And then moving on to tight end to wrap up the show here, we've got Harold Fannin and Juwan Jennings. So Harold Fannin was a major surprise for me anyways. I thought David Njoku was going to be locked and loaded as the only guy out there. And then Harold Fannin played almost as many snaps as he did. They were just constantly out there in 12 personnel. And so, that ended up with him with 7 catches, over 60 yards, and actually had 9 targets to Njoku's 6. So it was just like, okay, well, maybe I should have put more stock in Fannin. I did love him as a prospect. They spent a 3rd round pick on him. So, maybe this was always going to be the case, but they didn't end up leaning on a slot receiver a lot. And it was kind of just Fannin in that slot receiver role. So if this is going to continue, I think it's definitely, exciting because the player can definitely produce. He was a beast in college. And so I don't think this is always going to be the case though, because I do expect that Njoku is going to be more involved. And this has a little bit of a feel of the Isaiah Likely blow up in week 1 last year, right? So don't go crazy adding him for a bunch of fab. Tight ends are definitely the position you want to kind of target the least in fab, but it is kind of exciting to have a super talented rookie prospect go out and have a huge first game. So as long as Flacco's out there, I feel like he will be at least involved. It's not going to be a 0-0 here. And I could see him getting into that top 12-ish tight end because the back end of the position is pretty weak. And the last guy we're going to talk about here is Juwan Johnson. So this has a little bit of a feel of Jonnu Smith from last year because it was not a clear path to him getting a ton of targets. And then he comes out and has 11 targets in week 1 because Rattler threw it so many times. And so if they're going to be a high volume passing offense there in New Orleans, then I think the wheels could be up for Juwan Johnson. He is obviously super talented. He's going into his 6th year, still pretty young. And the other thing about him is he played almost all of the snaps. I think it was just, he missed like 1 snap. So it was like 98% of the snaps. And that's the highest of his career. So no Taysom Hill probably helped with that having him out there so much. But if he's going to be 100% or 95% or 90% snap player and him and Rattler are on the same page, it's going to be hard to see him not performing decently anyway. So again, another guy I could see backing his way into the top 12 tight ends. Now, I don't think this offense is going to have a ton of scoring opportunities. So I don't know that it's going to be like Jonnu necessarily last year where it was just like a score every week over the second half of the year, it felt like. But in terms of just consistent involvement in the offense, high targets, I feel like there is the possibility that ends up happening if this passing volume continues for the Saints. All right. With that, thank you guys so much for watching. We look forward to talking to you the next one.